Slowly but surely, U.S. troops are leaving Syria. Donald Trump says Daesh is gone and it's time his soldiers were home. But what impact will his decision have on the war? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the U.S. withdrawal from Syria. When Donald Trump announced last month he was pulling his soldiers out of Syria, it caught a lot of people off guard, including many within his own administration. His defense secretary resigned, as did America's top envoy in the fight against Daesh. Initially, the U.S. president said the terror group had been defeated and his troops were coming home immediately. He's since backtracked, saying Daesh is almost gone and that the withdrawal will take a little longer. Nevertheless, U.S. soldiers are set to leave Syria, and some fear the consequences could be catastrophic. Could it lead to a resurgence of Daesh? And will it embolden Iranian and Russian forces? Shoaib Hassan reports.
The flag of the Syrian regime now flies over Manbij. It's a scene that seemed unlikely just a few weeks ago. That is, till this happened.
We've been fighting for a long time in Syria. I've been president for almost 2 years, and we've really stepped it up. And we have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land, and now it's time for our troops to come back home.
US President Donald Trump decided to withdraw US forces from Syria as NATO ally Turkey geared up for an operation against the YPG, then in control of Manbij. The YPG is the Syrian branch of the PKK terror organization, which Ankara says has been using Syrian territory to carry out attacks against Turkey. The group is also part of the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, which spearheaded coalition efforts against Daesh. The US president's announcement came after a phone call from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who reportedly reiterated views he had expressed earlier about the YPG.
Temizlediniz, temizlediniz. Çıkardınız, çıkardınız. Çıkarmadığınız takdirde biz Münbiç'e gireceğiz. Açık konuşuyorum. Türkiye, Fırat'ın doğusundaki terör bataklığına müdahale konusunda yeteri kadar zaman kaybetmiştir.
But the leadership of the United States was not united. Defense Secretary James Mattis handed in his resignation soon after the decision was made public. It also drew criticism from European leaders who said the move would weaken the fight against Daesh. Some Kurds say they feel betrayed.
We have faced terrorism together. The Americans' sudden withdrawal from here after we worked together is unacceptable and cannot be qualified.
It appears a new status quo has been worked out, with the SDF handing over control of Manbij to Bashar al-Assad's forces. Its fighters have since moved away from the border and into territory controlled by the regime. Turkey now says it has no reason to march further into Syrian territory as long as the YPG stays away from the border. But local people are still worried.
The U.S.'s decision is wrong, and this is not acceptable according to values and international laws. Going from supporting a nation that wants to clean its areas from the darkened terrorist forces, and then suddenly deciding to withdraw from the areas where Daesh was driven away from, definitely goes against all moral and human values and international norms.
So, who are the real winners from Trump's decision? And could a US withdrawal give Daesh an opportunity to resurrect itself from the ashes? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington by Middle East analyst Matthew Brodsky. He's also a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. Also with us is Gerard Wittstadt. He is an attorney formerly with the US Navy. And in Doha is Fadil Abdulghani. He's the chairman and founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Fadil, let me begin with you. So Trump ordered the rapid withdrawal initially. Now he's slowing it down a little bit, but the US is still leaving Syria. Is that the right move?
Of course it's not. Now President Trump abandoned the Syrian, and why? For several reasons actually. First of all, let's us go back to their reason actually why they implemented in Syria. Let's go to their goal. First goal, defeated ISIS, eliminate Iranian militia or remove Iran from Syria. Third one, those are the main three ones. The influence in order to make effect in the political process. Those are the three main points. But if we go one by one, none of those have been accomplishment. First of all, ISIS still exists in Syria. They still control huge territory in the Tudmur Desert. The second one, the Iranian militia now they are so happy, the Iranian regime, they're going to expand in this area more and more and seize more territories and area. The third one, where is your influence now in the Syrian political process? Now this quarter of Syria make you have a huge influence in the political process. So none of those, their main three goals. If you give me one more second, why also they cannot leave like this? Because they have implementation toward the victims, which they have been targeted through their air forces. The international coalition, which led by the US forces, killed about 2,832 Syrian citizens, including children and women. So that you need to make reparation for those victims.
Isn't it an argument to say that if you've killed almost 3,000 Syrian citizens, pulling out is a good thing because you're going to be killing far fewer of those if you stay out of it? Nevertheless, let me go to Gerard, and I'll come back to you in a moment, Fadil. Gerard, Fadil is making an argument from a Syrian opposition perspective. I know Fadil wants a democratic and free Syria. He's anti-Bashar al-Assad, and he wants the United States to help. And he's saying, you're abandoning us. So, Gerard, what's up with the president?
Well, I don't think we are abandoning the Kurds in Syria. We have 5,000...
Besides the Kurds, Gerard, besides those that would fold into Kurdish groups, you have somebody from among the Syrian opposition saying, America, if you're going to be involved in Syria, stay the course and make sure you leave when things are a little bit better. It seems to be a cut and run, according to Fadil. So, Gerard, come in.
Well, you have to understand that the election here in the States 2 years ago, our president ran on a platform saying that he was going to withdraw troops from the Middle East. So he is making good on a promise that he made to the American people. And frankly, we're sorry if that causes more problems over there, but we've got nearly 8,000 Americans dead and $4.9 trillion of American money spent over there for nothing. Nobody understands what's going on in Syria right now. There is fighting between all types of different groups, and nobody is getting anywhere, unfortunately. And I think, frankly, the American people are tired of putting its lifeblood and its money into a situation that is just not getting any better.
So, Matthew Brodsky, in the absence of a clear policy and in the absence of a clear understanding of what to do, isn't it better to just leave?
Well, the fact is the president apparently doesn't have any idea what is happening with American policy. But the Syria team that he put in power in order to run affairs in Syria certainly has an idea of what the objectives are. It was laid out by one of your previous guests. Of course, the enduring defeat of ISIS has not been achieved. Militarily, we have an authorization for the use of force that only applies to ISIS, which, of course, is now considered an extension of Al-Qaeda as far as the U.S. is concerned. However, in the political process, we really have our presence plays a role in pushing back on Iran. So part of the plan has really been to establish American leverage, having had none from what this president was inheriting from Obama. And now we've had a political process and an economic process, which basically is to make sure that reconstruction funds does not go in to bolster Assad and Russia and Iran. All of that now will disappear as people rush to invest in Assad.
But Matthew,
30% of the
allow me to come in for a second here. Matthew, Assad already controls about 2/3 of the country. He has retaken a lot of the country. The Russians are undoubtedly there. The Iranians are undoubtedly there. Do you want America to clash head-on with all three of these groups while they stay in Syria? Surely you don't.
They're not clashing head-on. What they have is, as you say, 30% of the territory, northeastern Syria, which is over 90% of the hydrocarbons that are available. That's something that Assad and Russia and Iran were counting on, for some of them to avoid sanctions and others for reconstruction efforts. There's a lot of the resources that are under the United States' feet. Turkey, of course, itself holds some 10% within the Idlib province. Now, if the United States were to continue working toward the goal it would have, it would then be able to pump reconstruction money working with Turkey into that 40% of Syria and keep working with its European allies.
Okay.
By being able to do this, this was incidentally putting pressure on the Constitutional Committee in order to convene one in the first place, to make sure that there were people that would be representative, so that there would be a Syrian future that would transition away from Assad, which was another U.S. objective that President Trump is apparently just walking away from because he had some December 14th phone call with President Erdogan.
Right. Okay, and so Gerard, it's not just Matthew and Fadil that are unhappy with this. It seems there's a direct correlation between the resignation of James Mattis and this decision by President Trump to leave Syria. Let's have a little look at a couple lines from his resignation letter. I find this to be pretty interesting. The former U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis, in his resignation letter, saying, "Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours on these and other subjects, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position." Gerard, when we look at that, put Daesh or ISIS aside, Mattis is known to be big on Iran. He wants to stem what he believes the imperial agenda of the Iranians in the region. And he believes, it seems, that what Trump is doing is basically handing the Middle East to the Iranians and their allies on a platter. Gerard, is that fair?
It might be fair, but you have to understand, General Mattis is a patriot, and he understands the constitutional authority of President Trump. President Trump is the commander-in-chief. He makes the decision with regard to the Department of Defense. If the Secretary of Defense does not agree with him, he should step down, and he rightfully did.
But doesn't it make you worry that Mattis and McGurk are saying the president's not listening to us, so we're just going to get out of this because it's pointless us being here? We're the experts, and the guy doesn't want to listen to us.
Yeah, so again, is such a complicated situation, and anyone who really claims to be an expert in Syria is probably not an expert. I certainly don't claim to be one. It's too complicated of a situation. Look, we have had.
I can answer your question if you need someone to directly answer your question.
Matthew, excuse me, I was.
Okay, finish your point, Gerard, and Matthew can come in.
So again, Syria is a very complicated situation. There is no one, I believe, who has an expertise in that area. There are too many active involvements in there and too many different pushes and plays in Syria right now. So if President Trump makes the decision to pull our troops out of Syria, then the Secretary of State must abide by that. That's the way our system works in the United States.
Okay, that's how the system works. Okay, Matthew, come in. The fact that Mattis and McGurk said, okay, that's it, we're out, we're not going to be a part of this, what does that say about the plan or lack thereof? And basically, what does it say about the policy?
Well, clearly, they had disagreements with President Trump. The rumor around Washington for a long time had been that after the midterm elections, Mattis was either going to step down or Trump was going to replace him. McGurk was going to be retiring in February. McGurk is the head of the anti-ISIS plan that was put in place under the Obama administration. He was actually, that policy was, of course, about America's strategic realignment toward Iran and away from our traditional allies. Why Brett McGurk was actually still kept when President Trump said he was coming to Washington to drain the swamp, he would have been pretty high on the list that most Republicans would have said he's someone that would need to go. Now, both of these people, having it been assumed that they were going to leave, What President Trump did with his snap decision was to make martyrs out of them. It allowed Mattis to then say, I'm now leaving because of this. Brett McGurk, just pushed up the date that he was leaving by 2 months, and all the media coverage says, as you're asking, that they decided to leave because of Syria. Certainly this was a last straw, but these are two people that were on the way out, and Trump simply made martyrs out of them, which isn't good for him.
Okay, Fadil Abdulghani, looking at the former U.S. ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, would you consider him, Fadil, a friend to the Syrian people?
Actually, I disagree from what Ambassador Ford have been written.
Because he said he agrees with Trump.
Yeah, I'm totally. He justified the Trump actually decision, and why Syria now became complicated, or not now. Let's remember that Russian intervention take place in September 2015. Actually, the Syria is complicated and mess because the U.S. inaction in Syria. They didn't lead the process in Syria, and they have actually wonderful chance, and they miss it to remove this killer, which is used the broke the red line by using the chemical weapons against his people. They have wonderful opportunity in Obama administration and now in Trump, and we have little bit optimistic when the Trump, because he's the Republican, he's going to change like Obama process, but unfortunately now he is removing his troops from Syria without leading Syria to democracy. And we believe that if he did that, he's gonna to have this wonderful view again, that he's removing like dictatorship, 100 worse than Saddam Hussein. Bashar al-Assad committed like thousands of crimes against humanity against his own people, including using the chemical weapons.
But Fadil, the goal from
Trump will get
the US goal was never
the European support.
And over the past few years, the US goal was never to remove Assad, right? So even if the US was staying, it was never stated that the US was going to see it through until Assad falls. So why is it an issue that Assad is definitely confirmed as staying because the US is leaving?
No, what they are trying to do, like eliminate the Assad power and the Iranian in order to reach to the political process agreement. But that's also the U.S. didn't spend much actually. As you mentioned, aside supporting the BYD, what is the U.S. strategy in Syria? And we believe that, and I spoke that several times, in the White House, at the State Department, through my repeated visit to the New York and to the DC, that they make terrible mistake by supporting minority inside Syria. And now they are moving without even solving this terrible problem in the west of Syria.
Right.
Because now you need to make this area stable, and establish political leadership in this area by make joint like administration from the court, okay, and from the local themselves as well. But now you leave without even doing this very minor issue. Now the weapons will stay with the PYD. That's what we are hearing, and we are believing that a lot of battle will take place in those areas between Arab and Kurds in order after the U.S.
Let me ask you something very directly related to Turkey's role here. Do you accept and understand the Turkish perspective that, yes, while the U.S. is arming and funding the SDF forces, which includes the PYD or YPG, and they were integral over the years in the battle against Daesh or ISIS, that on the other side of this coin, they are a sister organization to the PKK, and those weapons will be turned on Turkish citizens, a NATO ally, and that's why Turkey found it unacceptable, and that's why Turkey might be breathing a sigh of relief that the US is no longer going to be supporting the PYD or YPG on the ground. Do you accept that Turkish position, Fadil, as somebody who's in the Syrian opposition?
I said that very obvious and frankly to the American. I said we have like other experience in Al-Furat Shield, and despite the maybe minor mistake, but it's become much more better than only support minority inside the society. That will lead for long civil war. Of course, the Turk-like experience is much better because they are relying on the society, diverse society. We need to include the Kurds. Of course, they are part, but the population of Kurds, it's part from the Syrian population. And we are not actually make any discrimination between Kurds or Arab. We need the democratic company. If the president become Kurds or Arab or any sect that acceptable for us, we have only one condition: to love his country, to love his people. But of course, the Turks' experience by Al-Furat Shield and by others is better than the PYD, and the PYD doesn't hidden actually their link to the PKK. All of the media remember the huge photos of Öcalan in Al-Raqqa, and that's not acceptable for us. If ISIS like put al-Baghdadi photos, that's similar actually, and the PYD does not represent Al-Kurd at all, same as ISIS does not represent Islam.
Matthew, as we're running out of time, I want to ask you whether you agree with the fears of Senator Lindsey Graham, who said he hopes that what Trump has done with Syria is not what Obama did with Iraq, essentially to leave a vacuum which only creates more chaos, more disaster, and worse terror groups than we could ever imagine. Is that what's going to happen? Do you fear that?
If the withdrawal continues apace, whether it's 100 days or 120 days, it'll actually be far worse than what Obama did. See, when Obama pulled out American troops from Iraq in 2011, this was some time where an analyst like me had to point out to a threat that was not entirely there yet. There was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but ISIS did not exist. So we had to say, if you do this, these type of scenarios might occur. When the president announced the U.S. withdrawal, we were actively engaged with our Kurdish allies fighting that day against ISIS. There were some 200 to 300 U.S. strikes against ISIS targets within Syria in just the previous week, and that was announced by the commanders of Operation Inherent Resolve a few hours before the president's tweet. So right now we know what the threat is, but additionally we know for a fact the way Iran is going to benefit from this in terms of land corridors and creating more bases from which to attack Israel or Jordan. And we know what the threat is to the future of Syria because it trades all of America's leverage. It's really too bad President Trump decided not to say, hey, I've been able to do something that no other president has done before. I did the Goldilocks policy. I chose the correct American policy with the right amount, a small American footprint, had Kurds do most of the fighting on the ground, and was able to create a lot of U.S. leverage and work toward American goals without having to tinker with a politically impossible authorization for military force. This would be really sellable if the president understood it and decided to use that approach instead.
Okay, well, it's certainly not Goldilocks, and there's certainly lots of questions about what will actually unfold in Syria. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm out of time. I have to move on. Matthew, Gerard, and Fadil, thanks for joining us. Still to come on the program, deadly protests shake Sudan. Could anti-government demonstrators force the president from power? And support Israel or else? We ask why this American teacher was fired and is now suing the state of Texas. What started as a protest over the price of bread in Sudan has turned into a deadly anti-government demonstration. For 2 weeks, protesters have been demanding that President Omar al-Bashir step down. Amnesty International says dozens of demonstrators have been killed as security forces crack down. Sudan is in the middle of an economic crisis, and more than 20 opposition groups have banded together, calling for him to transfer power to a sovereign council. Although Bashir has been in office for almost 3 decades, he doesn't seem ready to relinquish power just yet. But with pressure mounting, could that decision be taken out of his hands? Natalie Perhonen takes a look.
Across Sudan, people are raising their voice against their president, Omar al-Bashir. These protests started over the price of bread. They've now become the biggest challenge to Bashir's 29-year rule. They're chanting, the people want the fall of the regime. Police have been accused of using excessive force. President Bashir has told them to rein it in. At least 19 people have died in the last 2 weeks. But protesters are still coming onto the streets. As the country was about to mark its Independence Day, the president tried to reassure his nation.
وبلادنا تمر بظروف اقتصادية ضاغطة أضرت بشريحة واسعة من مجتمعنا لأسباب خارجية وداخلية تعلمونها.
He sees an end in sight.
فإننا على ثقة بأننا نوشك على تجاوز هذه المرحلة الصعبة والعابرة.
Bashir seized power in a military coup in 1989. He has ruled ever since with an iron fist. Bashir is wanted by the International Criminal Court on charges of genocide and war crimes allegedly committed in Darfur. There have been protests against him before, but unlike previous ones, these calls for change are happening around the country, not just in the capital. Sudan is in a financial crisis. Inflation is sitting at about 70%. The US lifted sanctions against the country in 2017, but it remains listed as a state sponsor of terrorism. The government says that is preventing economic recovery. For now, Bashir looks set to continue his reign. A majority of lawmakers have backed a constitutional amendment to extend term limits, which could see him rule indefinitely. But with his citizens' calls for change growing louder, will he maintain his grip on power? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, let's go to our guest now in Khartoum. I'm joined by Rabi Abdul Ati Obaid. He's a senior member of the ruling National Congress Party. Also with us is Sudan's former State Minister of Foreign Affairs and Member of Parliament, Samani Al-Wasila Al-Samani. And in Vancouver is author and activist Amir Ahmed Nasr. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Amir Ahmed Nasr, can I begin with you? Sir, for you, is this about bread prices or is it about something far bigger?
Imran, thank you for having me on the show. Prices have been going up steadily for basic necessities in Sudan over the past few years. This is not new. The prices have been going up. Living has been harder and harder over the past few years. And what resulted in this, finally, this outpouring of anger, of resentment, of a desire for a new change in Sudan, are things that have been building up for the last 30 years. For the last 30 years, this government has been at war with the people of Sudan, sadly and unfortunately. It has been at war with the people of South Sudan, the people of Darfur, where ethnic cleansing has happened, the people of North Sudan, the Nubians who are facing construction of the dams, and also people in the East. And now the battle has finally arrived to the center of the power of the regime, the stronghold. This is the Battle of Khartoum. What's most impressive is people's demands saying that this is peaceful, silmiya, silmiya, peaceful, peaceful. And yet they're getting shot at in broad daylight with snipers. And the evidence is in video footage with x-rays from Sudanese doctors showing bullets in people's heads, bullets in people's necks, and bullets in their chests. This is deliberate targeted killing. The Sudanese the different political parties have come together, the majority of them saying that Omar al-Bashir can have a constitutional amendment to rule again and to be president again, to run for so-called elections that have no legitimacy and have no fairness, that are completely rigged. For them to do this, this is basically saying we want him to rule again, forever. Until when? Until when is this going to happen? Things are unbearable. To be frank, Imran, I got up at 4 a.m. today for this interview. I don't want to be here. I have no interest in being on this show. But the situation has become so unbearable for family that we can no longer ignore politics. We can no longer ignore business as usual. The Titanic is sinking,
right,
and we need to do something.
Let's ask the man from the ruling party, Rabi Abdulati. Is this not merely about fuel shortages or fuel subsidies and bread prices and the cost of living? Has this been a 30-year build-up? Has it been a 30-year-long problem?
Actually, my dear, this crisis happening after the year 2011, and this is due to the loss of the revenue of petrol after secession of the South. But in the years from 2000 up to 2011, the people of Sudan actually they lived and they actually witnessed a prosperity and luxurious life. As Sudan at that time, from the year 2000 up to the year 2011, we received a lot of people from Egypt, from Ethiopia, from Eritrea, even from Asia, working in Sudan as expatriates. But really now we are in need of actually to reconstruction of the government and to implement austerity plans so that to remove all the obstacles on all the problems that facing Sudan people at this area, because now Sudan actually is a rich country, but we need even the opposition and the government to sit together and to exchange opinions to see what is the proper policy for resolving all the problems now facing and confronting Sudanese people.
If it's a rich country, doesn't that mean that the ruling party and the government is corrupt? Because that money, it's not going to the people.
No, actually, during the war between South and North, and during the war that in Darfur, as I can confirm that now the war in Darfur is now have no, any effect, because all refugees and all internal displaced people, they now they are coming to live their normal life in Darfur, and the South also actually after secession of the South, now the war stopped, and I think now peace is all over the country, but we are in need to reorganize the priorities, because we have achieved a lot of projects. But this needs again to discuss how to set the priorities. What is number one? What is number two? What is number three? And how to administer the resources of Sudan? Because now we are producing more than 200 tons of gold, and we have a lot of borders, and these borders not controlled by the government, and a lot of smuggling. I think that now the government is taking a lot of steps and a lot of procedures so that
if that's the long-term plan,
these crises which you are witnessing now will be removed in a very short period of time.
Okay, so you have a long-term plan, but looking at the immediate reaction, Rabi, to the protests, we have dozens of people shot dead, opposition leaders arrested, social media choked, the internet choked. Is that a sign of a strong or a weak government?
I don't think that, actually there is a crisis. Actually, we have a problem in, but a lot of the majority of problems now solved. Now you can find bread everywhere. The crisis of bread now and the shortage of bread is have no presence now. And the shortage of benzene now, there is no shortage of benzene, as now benzene is available in all benzene stations. And I think now, after a very short period of time, as promised by the government and promised by finance minister and all the ministers of the economic sector, in a very short period of time, all these problems will be solved. And I don't think that the cabinet and the executive ministers, as well as NCP leaders, will fail to solve this problem in a very short period of time.
Let me ask Amir Ahmed Nasser. So we have President Omar al-Bashir ordering an investigation into what happened, what led to those people being killed, right? And we also have the parliament passing its 2019 fiscal budget and saying we're going to make money available for the people so that people can have a decent quality standard of living and they can live with dignity. Why aren't you willing to give them the chance to try and implement this?
President Omar al-Bashir just a few days ago was speaking to the chiefs of police in Sudan. And he used the word qasas. And basically, he is using verses from the Quran to try to justify and saying that the killing of protesters is justified if you're trying to maintain stability, because then the stability will save the lives of many, many people. Meaning, killing the protesters is okay as long as we want to maintain control and stability. So he's giving license to the police chiefs to go out and to basically fire and kill innocent protesters. This is unacceptable. We can have dialogue, we can have negotiations, we can talk. I'm a member of the youth. I'm not a member of any political party. I have no interest in being a member of any political party. I just want to know that the country can continue and family can stop suffering needlessly. So the fact that he's justifying the killing of protesters, this is not an encouraging sign. Secondly, regarding the budget, we have heard these promises again and again in the past, every time, and nothing has improved. I will concede the point that the spokesperson of the government, the official spokesperson just now made about 2011, the separation of South Sudan and how all revenues declined. Sure, but that is a very easy excuse and convenient excuse to say that corruption has nothing to do with it, and the fact that the majority of the budget of the country goes towards state security services, military, private security, police, to simply keep the loyalty of those systems of oppression still continue. However, that is not happening, and there are defections going on because people are upset in the military, they're angry in the police because they're saying this is not right. We should not kill our own brothers and sisters. This is not right. This is wrong.
Okay, and just for some housekeeping here, Al-Samani Al-Wasila unfortunately had an audio issue, so we don't have him for the moment, and that's why you haven't heard from him, and I haven't gone to him for the moment. So just so you gentlemen know that that is the case. Let me go to Rabi Abdul Ati. So we have lawmakers who voted on that amendment of an article in the Constitution to allow Omar al-Bashir to stand again so he can have another term. Let me first ask you, sir, did you vote for that to happen, for your president to run for another term? And if so, why?
You know, actually, the election which will be carried out in the year 2020 is an election which should witness entire transparency and credibility. And I think that National Congress Party is having a right to nominate Omar al-Bashir or to nominate X or Z or Y. But also, at the same time, other political parties, they have a right also to nominate who is suitable to actually lead and to rule the country for the coming period. And this is actually, it is a freedom. And I don't think that, there is any, objection for other political parties to nominate whomsoever they want to rule the country.
You are nominating the man who's been in charge for 29 years to run for longer. Certainly. But what the point is, they can nominate whoever they want to.
But National Congress.
You want your president, who's been running the country for 29 years, to run for another term. You have to change the constitution in order to do that. While there are people on the street saying he should step down, isn't it time he makes way for other people?
You know, actually, the people in the streets that they are now they are now protesting and making demonstrations. Those people, they are not representing the majority of Sudanese people. As you know that now, the government of national unity and the government of one accord now is including more than 30 political parties in addition to some groups that lifting arms before. And I don't think that those people who are demonstrating, they can change the regime or they can change the government, because the government, we have only actually acknowledge the way of changing and toppling of the government.
But, okay.
This is due to the
ballot
boxes,
but on the
and
one,
transparent election.
And I don't mean to question your system.
At any time.
Certainly, I don't mean to question your system or your democratic system, but it does seem like a contradiction to me. If you tell me at the beginning that the people have a legitimate right to protest against rising prices, against bread, against fuel shortages, you tell me they have a right to do so and we need to reform the government because the people have a legitimate right to protest. And then a few minutes later, you tell me these people don't represent the majority of Sudanese people. So who are these people then?
Yes, it is legal for the people to protest and to show their opinion, but it is not acceptable for the people to come and to, make blockings in the streets and to lit fire in the public institutions and to make a lot of robbery for the property of the people. This is actually mixed together, and it is allowed for the political parties and for all people to express their opinion, political opinion, in their premises and according to the law. And I don't think that destruction is acceptable by the only making demonstrations and doing demonstrations to harm people and Sudanese people and their property.
Justified?
I don't think that our constitution is actually not accepting the public opinion and not accepting the other opinion, but actually we don't accept any destruction of the institutions, whether these institutions belonging to the private sector or the public sector.
Those people who were killed, was it justified, sir?
No, there is no justification actually to use power, to use, violence against the protesters. But I think that, the Minister of Interior and also the Justice Minister also formed actually a committee to investigate who killed the protesters and why they have been killed and who harmed the people and who lit fire in the property of the public sector or the private sector. And we are now waiting for the result of this investigation according to the committees formed.
Amir Ahmed Nasser, I want to ask you a big picture question and based on our personal relationship as well, because the first time I interviewed you was quite a long time ago, and at that time we were both, I think, sitting in Washington, D.C., and at that time the view from the American side and generally from the Western side of Omar al-Bashir was to highlight that this was a man who was wanted by the ICC for genocide charges, crimes against humanity charges. There was a Free Darfur movement, right? And generally Sudan was seen by the West as a kind of pariah state. That's changed over the years. Sudan has kind of come in from the cold. The US dropped their 3 decades of sanctions very recently. Al-Bashir is doing business with the Europeans on counterterrorism, on refugees, the United States and Europeans and elsewhere. Doesn't that tell you that it takes for something massive for Western powers to pressure Sudan to change anything right now? Because Sudan is on side. It's not the Sudan of 7 or 8 years ago.
Absolutely, Imran. The Sudan of 7 or 8 years ago, the issue of Darfur was very much taking a lot of the attention, and the oppression of the people in Khartoum wasn't highlighted because, frankly, we are oppressed, but we weren't getting killed and shot at in broad daylight so regularly. This has happened now too often in Khartoum. This uprising started in Al-Bara. It spread to other cities and towns. And now the people of Sudan are united, demanding basic dignity, basic rights, equal citizenship. And we have seen the incompetence of this government. The foreign powers in the region need to understand that this time is very different because this time it's in Khartoum and it's existential. We're at a crossroads. We can either go the direction of Tunisia or we can go the direction of Libya or even worse, Syria. And frankly, and I think even the government spokesperson will agree with me, that nobody wants this. Nobody wants Sudan to become like Syria. Nobody wants Sudan to become like Yemen. But this is not up to the people. The people don't have an option. If they go to the ATM, there's no cash. And if there is cash in the ATM, the money and the currency is worth less and less. And even if the money is enough, when you want to go to the shops to buy something, There isn't even basic necessities, not even bread. This is not just because of sanctions. This is not just because of the separation of the South. Those are factors. True, I admit that. We must agree on that. However, the corruption is a huge issue. The majority of the state budget goes to security and military and police to maintain loyalty. And now there is not enough money to maintain the loyalty of the system. So we are at a crisis point. And therefore, the people in Turkey, the Turkish government, the European Union, the United States, they need to understand, do you want to spend billions and billions of dollars later down the line when we have a bigger mess and a bigger catastrophe like Syria or Libya? Or do you want to intervene now to make sure that we have a transitional government so that we can restructure, so that we can actually have a better economy and have more political freedoms that can create the stability for us to thrive? We are a rich country with resources. We have a lot of rich resources. We have a lot of talented, brilliant, smart people who love the country, who want to contribute and make it better. Right. But we cannot do this as long as this regime is in power. So the EU, the United Nations, Turkey, the United States, they need to understand this is an important moment to put pressure and intervene, because the choice is not up to the uprising, which is silmiya, peaceful, peaceful. The choice is up to the government. And I really hope the government does something responsible, because otherwise we really could go the direction of Libya when Tunisia is a possibility.
Understood.
And in our history, we have had 2 uprisings that succeeded, and therefore, hopefully, in due time, the pressure is building up. This one can succeed peacefully, peacefully.
Gentlemen, I've got to wrap, but I do appreciate you all taking the time to join us here on the Newsmakers. I thank you sincerely, Rabi Abdulati and Amir Ahmed Nasser. Thanks again.
Having grown up as a Palestinian, I know firsthand the oppression and the struggle that Palestinians face on a daily basis. You know, I have to set an example for my kids. We got to stand up for what's the justice and for right and equal opportunity for everybody, and humane conditions. And so for me, it was an easy decision in that aspect. You know, I could not sign it.
Bahia Amawi is a teacher with almost a decade of experience working with disabled, autistic and speech-impaired students. But right now, she doesn't have a job. Amawi told The Intercept that after refusing to sign a clause in her contract that would forbid her from boycotting Israel, her services would no longer be required. Why? Well, in Texas, contractors are banned from taking part in the campaign known as BDS, or Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Against Israel. And 25 other states have passed similar laws. But the Palestinian-American teacher is taking her battle to the courts, saying her First Amendment right to free speech has been violated. Well, joining me now in Washington, D.C. is Carolyn Homer. She's a lawyer representing Bahia Amawi with the Council on American Islamic Relations. Thanks for joining us, Carolyn. First of all, is it absolutely clear that she was fired for this, for refusing to sign that pledge to not boycott Israel?
Yes. She has been working for Pflugerville School District for 9 years, and this year when she received her contract renewal, it included for the first time this clause saying she had to vow she would not boycott Israel.
Do you have sympathy with the school?
When she refused to sign it,
certainly.
she lost her job.
Certainly. Do you have sympathy with the school that they're saying, hey, this is the law, this is Texas, you got to sign this thing or else we can't employ you?
Yeah, so the school released a statement on Facebook, and in their communications with Ms. Amawi stated, we can't pay you unless you sign this statement.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the lawsuit. Tell me the specifics of it and what you're trying to get out of it.
So this lawsuit is in defense of Bahia's First Amendment rights. The United States Supreme Court has recognized that it doesn't matter if you're an individual citizen or a government contractor, you have a right to protest, you have a right to engage in boycotts, and you have a right to free speech.
Was any argument made that somehow this had something to do with her job as a speech pathologist, that signing this or not signing this had something to do with the work she actually did?
We know of absolutely no argument about how boycotting Israel is in any way relevant to Bahia providing speech language pathology services or Arabic services to Texas school children.
help me understand the thinking behind the law in Texas, because we have Governor Greg Abbott saying any boycott of Israel is considered to be un-Texan, and Texas is not going to do business with any company that boycotts Israel. So it's interesting. I mean, he says company, and I think when it was designed, they're talking about businesses, right? But these are individuals being employed in specific roles. So help me understand how it went from Texas not wanting to encourage BDS to a case like Bahia Amawi's.
So the Representative King, who introduced the measure in Texas that later got signed into law, said that he wanted this to ban boycotts by any individual or company. And the definition of company in the law itself includes sole proprietorships. That is a United States tax code term, which means individuals who aren't employees, but who are receiving income through contracts on a per contract basis. And so, although some people have defended this law by saying it only applies to companies, the very clear language of the law applies to individuals who contract with the state as well.
So, if I understand you correctly, a small victory would be Bahia being reinstated, but the big victory would be what?
The big victory is striking this law down from the Texas books completely. We want every individual, every company in the state of Texas to be able to engage in political boycotts without that affecting their free speech rights. That's a right under U.S. law, and Texas shouldn't be banning that as a condition of receiving government funds.
Karen and Homer, been good to talk to you on The Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Sheikh Hasina wins the election in Bangladesh. But was the vote rigged? Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.